Good morning or good afternoon, not sure exactly what it is for you. Wanted to walk you through a couple of things that are going to be important for Chapter 18. Hopefully you've read the chapter by now. If you haven't, please pause this and go back and look at it. There's some important stuff in there that I'm going to expect you to reference in the journal response. So, um, Okay, pause over. Everybody has read it. Good, let's move on. First thing that I want you to recognize is that there is no standard English. There's a dude named David Crystal, pretty well-known linguist at the University of Wales. He is one of the champions of multiple Englishes. He suggests that standard British English is simply one dialect. American English is one dialect. It's very different than standard British English. Um, and chances are you're going to have multiple variants of English spoken in your classroom. Uh, I mention this primarily because teachers have this tendency, this a history, I guess, of disparaging various forms of English that aren't standard American English or standard British English or academic English. So what is academic English? Well, it's another dialect. It's really not standard English. I don't know if there is a standard English. So academic English poses a problem for us as educators, primarily because academic English is spoken in schools, but it's not necessarily universal. It's not spoken in homes. So one other option apart from academic English that tends to butt up against academic English is AAVE or AAE, which is African American English. It's very different than academic English, but it is still considered a dialect on par with other Englishes. So a lot of people tend to put it down, Ebonics or AAE, saying that it's not accurate, it's not a real language, and that's false. You can pretty much ask any linguist under the sun, and they will tell you that that is wrong, I guess myself included. For example, one of the things that is common to African American English that is not common to academic English, something that I think academic English really ought to borrow from, is the concept of the habitual be. So the habitual be is kind of an ongoing tense. It can be used as either something over a long period of time, past, present, and future, like my daughter be singing, which means that she sang in the past, she's singing now, she's going to sing in another 5, 10 minutes, she'll be singing her entire life. Or it could be repetition from time to time. For example, folks be so interested in presents at Christmas, they'd be forgetting about the food. Um, an example that I think is kind of a unique, interesting way of looking at our language, something that I think we ought to be able to leverage. So, one thing that happens in a lot of schools is code switching. It's important for us as educators to recognize what it is. A lot of times it's very intentional based on an audience or purpose. For example, the way that I talk to my students is different than the way I talk to my children, is different than the way I talk to my wife, than my friends, than my grandparents. And a lot of times it's inadvertent. There's this really cool video about AAE in the classroom. It's really old, but it's still good. So I'm going to post this PowerPoint so you can access that video. It's short, it's like 3 minutes long or something like that. But if you want to know what code switching looks like being taught very intentionally in a classroom, check that out. One thing to mention is language is fundamental to our identities. In fact, my entire PhD was based on the premise that language and shared experience, the overlap between language and shared experience and identity, um, the Venn diagram, if you will, is pretty much just a single circle. So, asking children then to change the way that they communicate is not only difficult academically, it can be really, really difficult emotionally. Um, Not to say that they shouldn't learn academic English. It's really important for them to learn academic English because that's where all of the power is. However, doing it at the expense of their home language is problematic, to say the least. So, in chapter 18, these are some of the questions that popped into my mind. What were your thoughts about Ebonics and AAVE before reading the chapter? What are your thoughts now? And really, um, what role does or should AAE have in our schools as we move forward? And that's really the prompt that I want you to answer in this journal. Okay? Finally, just a couple of closing remarks. Um, Even though AAE isn't really accepted in mainstream society, it has been accepted by pretty much every other linguist. It's really important for two things. Language is built with different syntactic grammatical usage devices, um, including the difference between academic English, British English, American English, Sheboyganese, which I guess is kind of close to me, near and dear to my heart. Even though that's not an official language, it kind of seems that way sometimes. And then finally, more importantly, language is inherently tied to identity. By legitimizing AAE, we legitimize the experience and identity of Black Americans as Black Americans. And I would say this last little parenthetical statement, in the same way that natives are now allowed and encouraged to learn their own language, think about this tied to Section 2, the chapters that we just recently presented on, and how important it was for Native Americans and Hispanics to study their own culture in places in ways that are meaningful to them. So um, language extends beyond that. So if you have questions, let me know. But this is, I think you should be good to go between chapter 18 and this to answer the prompt.